got much to say on this psalm, as it really does speak for itself, but I just want to share with you three things that have occurred to me over the past month or so as I prepared for today. And the first two have been signposted by what has just preceded. In the last anonymous modern-day psalm that I shared, and in my call to the kids to lead us in joyful celebration. So the first is that we choose what to believe, and our actions will follow our beliefs. It's very much the view behind the Freedom in Christ series that I recommend to anyone. And it's why you and I call ourselves Christians when others don't. It's because by faith, we have chosen to believe that Jesus is the Son of God, and that he came to earth and was born as a frail and vulnerable baby, and lived as a human for 33 years, experiencing our temptations and trials and tribulations, our hurts and pains, our depths of despair. He hung out with the dropouts and untouchables, and he experienced rejection more painful than we can imagine at the hands of the very people that he created. So we choose to still believe God's promises, even when all around is crumbling and falling to pieces and kicking us in the groin, when we're already down and hurting. We choose to believe that God will lift us out of the miry clay, and we will pull through and see another day. Now, it's like that, I think, with kids who rarely, if ever, dwell on the bad stuff that happens, every bit as much to them as it does to us. Instead, they pretty much always expect life to be amazing and God to be awesome as he promised us. So too, also, with our anonymous psalmist, who took their lead from John Smith's sermon a couple of weeks back and with capital letters for emphasis said, "I will give praise and lift my voice." And suddenly, hope springs forth, and we're reminded that heaven itself and its angels will shout, "Amen," because the victory is won, and together we will march and press forward until that glorious day of your return. I'm getting goosebumps as I read that, and suddenly my pit of despair has turned into glorious expectation, just because I held on to God's promises in spite of my circumstances and resolved to give praise and lift my voice. Now, Susie explained the backdrop and context to our past week and to her psalm. It's been a really tough week for all of us since then. But as Susie expressed in her psalm, and I'd seen a version of it, but I hadn't seen the final thing, and I didn't know whether she'd be able to share. But I've given praise and lifted my voice to God for Fudge, and that your many prayers have provided, that lifting my voice to God and your many prayers have provided comfort as we remember his wonderful life. And he was a fantastic and boisterous and exuberant bundle of energy and fun, and he spread joy and laughter wherever he went, and whoever he touched, whether they were two-legged or four-legged. The second thing that I want to share is that the darkest hour is just before the dawn. So it was with Jesus as he underwent crucifixion. And so maybe it is for many of us now, as we mourn the loss of loved ones, the crippling pain of illness or injury, the turmoil of divorce, or the loss of a livelihood, and we fear how we'll ever be able to cope again. I'm not sure quite how this account stacks up with the fact that we've been studying a ruck of psalms from the sons of Korah, and John Smith helpfully explained to us about who the sons of Korah were, but I have it on authority from an esteemed Bible teacher, Dr. John Phillips, that there is an amazing story behind the inspired songs of Psalm 46, which we studied last week with Graham, Psalm 47, which Rosemary read today and is today's reading, and 48, which I think Richard Whitney is talking on next week. And what a story it was. Here's how John Phillips himself tells it. The massive armies of Assyria had deployed themselves all around Jerusalem. The watchers on the city walls could see nothing but a vast set of troops and tents as far as the eye could reach. The imperial standards of the Assyrian Empire flew in the breeze as the battering rams and slings, the scaling ladders, and all the machinery of war was assembled before the gates. Fierce-faced, bearded men were burnishing their shields and sharpening their swords for the onslaught, for the success they were sure would be theirs. The time for talking, parleying, and propaganda was over. Hezekiah had refused to listen. He had ignored all promises of generous treatment, of honourable terms, of peaceful resettlement. So tomorrow the assault would begin. The battering rams would pound away at the gates of Jerusalem. The engines of war would hurl great boulders into the city. The archers would blacken the sky with their arrows, and the sappers would begin to undermine the walls. If the siege was stubborn, wrathful Assyrians would call on famine and pestilence to be their allies within the city gates. Then they would sack the city, ravish the women, massacre the men, and seize the spoil. The evening shadows deepened into dusk, and campfires glowed as the confident Assyrian commandos set up their watchposts, placed their sentries, and prepared for a good night's rest before beginning the morrow's arduous tasks of war. From that sleep, they never awoke. That night, the angel of the Lord visited the Assyrian camp. He smote the sentries where they stood, smote the generals in their tents, smote the officers as they pored over their last-minute plans for assault, and smote rank and file of the army as they slept. Silently he came, silently he went, and behind him he left a wide swathe of death. There were some 185,000 stiffening corpses when his work was done. A swift-working pestilence was the weapon he used. The watchers on the walls had a sleepless night, pacing up and down, their eyes peeled for a surprise attack. Hezekiah and Isaiah doubtless spent the night praying as well as watching. As the dawn broke, they made their rounds, encouraged their men, and sought to inspire trust in God, not just in their weapons of war and their massive walls. They looked out over the Assyrian camp as the sun hooded the hills with light. Strange. There was no move, no sound of the trumpet, no call to arms, nothing. They watched as the sun rose higher, nothing. Then they saw carrion birds circling round the camp of the fire. Those birds sensed death. Obviously, something had happened in the enemy ranks. Then spies brought the word the foe was no more. The camp was full of corpses. The war was over without an arrow being fired. We can imagine that the Hebrews were delirious with delight. History had known nothing like it. It was a defeat to the pride and might of Sennacherib, a defeat from which he would never recover. Never again would Assyrian armies tramp across Judean hills. Hezekiah went quietly to his room, looked over his previous psalm last week's, the psalm in which he had sung of the refuge, the river, and the ruler, written when all seemed as black as could be. And he took his pen to write its sequel, Psalm 47. So I say, take heart and celebrate that our God is king over all the nations. The victory is won, and we can look forward to his return with certain expectation, even in this, our darkest hour. The third thing that I want to share is that it's been such a blessing to receive all of those videos and words and songs that we've been sharing. Not only do we bless God and bless ourselves when we open our heart to God, but we bless each other also. As Christine's modern-day psalm put it, I gave my children the gift of communication in order to interact with me and my children. Remember, God is not looking for eloquence in fine words, just the honest expressions of your heart. As Emily put it when she first encouraged us to write our own psalm through her daily bread early this month, let the words of the psalmists, and indeed our modern-day psalmists today, inspire your own honest reflection and rants, and then listen in the quiet for God's response. Now, apologies that I've not left any time for listening in the quiet today, but I'm certain that if you open your heart to God, he will be faithful and speak right back into it to you personally. Hopefully today will have given you more resolve and courage to share exactly what's on your heart with him. And I'd love to continue to receive those thoughts if you feel prompted to write them following today's broadcast. I'm going to stop there rather than carry on. I'm going to stop there rather than carry on. We're going to move into a second worship set now from Arlene.